You walk into the house on a hot July evening, and the air hits you like a warm, wet blanket. It smells of baked timber and stale dust. In the window, a heavy box fan is humming on high speed, its plastic blades a blur, rattling against the wooden sash. You stand right in front of it, feeling that blast of air against your skin. But the moment you step 2 feet to the left, the stuffiness closes back in. The air in the rest of the room is completely dead. Outside, the night is finally beginning to cool, but inside you are trapped in a hot box, watching your electric meter spin like a top as you pay the power company for the privilege of sweating. Most folks see this problem and think the solution is to spend more money. They go out to the big store and buy a larger fan or an expensive dripping window air conditioner that eats electricity by the mouthful. They line up machines in every room, filling the house with a constant, anxious roar. It seems like the only way to survive the season. But understand this, that fan running in your window right now is likely doing less than half the work it should, because it is set up exactly backwards. Stop and think about it. Why do we accept that keeping a home bearable must cost a heavy toll every single month? How did families live comfortably in these very same valleys for generations before a single copper wire was ever strung across the fields? I am Elias. I keep up this Lancaster County place the old way, with no ties to the public power company. My lights and my few small tools run off a modest bank of solar batteries fed by the sun, so every watt of power matters to me. I cannot afford to waste energy on inefficient machines. Out here, we have to look at a house not as a consumer of electricity, but as a living thing that breathes. Over the years, by watching the land and listening to the old people, I learned that there is a right way and a wrong way to move air. And the right way is the exact opposite of what most folks do today. Let me tell you about summers in my grandfather's house, because that is where the scales fell from my eyes. That old frame house had no machine to cool it, of course. Yet, even during the dog days of August, when the corn was ripening and the air was so thick you could slice it, the front parlor stayed remarkably cool. As a boy, I never thought to wonder why. I just took it for granted. But it wasn't magic. It was my grandfather working the house like a fine tool. In the evenings, I would hear the heavy thud of the oak sashes being thrown open to the dark. In the morning, before the dew had even dried on the pasture grass, he went round silently, shutting every window tight and pulling the heavy green shades on the eastern and southern sides. He understood the rhythm of the day. He never read a textbook on thermodynamics, but he had a feel for the air. He knew which window to crack just an inch to pull a draft straight through the kitchen on a dead still afternoon. What I am telling you isn't just an old-timer's memory. In recent years, folks with scientific instruments, engineers who measure airflow down to the cubic foot, have tested these traditional methods. They used smoke machines and digital gauges, and they proved that the old people were entirely right. The math backs up the custom. But before we go a step further, let's establish an honest limit. If you live in a place where the night air never drops below 90 degrees, or if the humidity is so dense it blankets the ground like soup for weeks on end, these methods will not turn your house into an icebox. They will not freeze cream. Traditional self-reliance is about working with nature, not conquering it. It is about making a hot day bearable and a cool night restorative, without draining your pocketbook. Now, look at that fan in the window again. Most folks point the blades inward, wanting the fan to blast the outside air directly onto their faces. It feels good for a second, but think about the physics of it. A house is a sealed container. If you push air into a container that is already full, you create a pocket of high pressure right in front of the window. The air hits the back wall, swirls around in a useless little circle, and suffocates the rest of the house. You aren't cooling the home, you are just stirring the soup. The first great truth of moving air is this. To cool a house, you must treat the fan not as a blower, but as a pump. You do not want to force air in. You want to draw the old stagnant heat out. When you turn that fan around so it faces the outside, It begins to evacuate the heavy, warm air that has collected near the ceiling. By pushing that air out into the yard, you create a gentle vacuum inside the rooms. Nature abhors a vacuum, so the house begins to draw fresh, cooler night air in through every other open window and door on the opposite side of the building. Suddenly, you aren't just cooling one small spot in front of a plastic grid. You have created a living current, a river of cool air flowing through the hallway, under the doors and across every floor. But simply turning the fan around is only the beginning of the secret. There is a second truth, one that seems completely backwards until you see it work. Most people jam the fan tight against the window screen, wedging it into the frame so no air can escape around the sides. They think this forces all the air through the mesh, but if you do that, the fan actually fights itself. Around the very tips of the spinning blades, a fan naturally creates a small backdraft, pulling some of that outside air right back in around its own edges. It is a closed loop of wasted energy. To fix this, you must do something that defies modern instinct. You must change the physical placement of the machine within the room, utilizing a principle of fluid movement that the old builders understood by heart. When you alter the distance between the blades and the exit point, the entire volume of moving air shifts in a way that will surprise you. I want to show you exactly where to place this fan, down to the inch, and how to configure the windows on the shady side of your house to double the speed of the breeze without using another watt of power. Let me step over to the window and show you how this looks in practice. Let us walk over to the window together and set this up properly, step by step. First, take a look at the room you are in. You want to choose a window on what we call the exhaust side of the house. If there is even a faint breath of wind outside, look at the grass or the leaves on the trees. Find the side of the house where the air is naturally leaving, the downwind side. Or choose a window that sits in the full afternoon sun, where the air inside is at its hottest and most stagnant. This is where your engine will sit. Now, pull your fan away from the wall. If it has been sitting in a dusty corner all winter, take a piece of dry cheesecloth and wipe the blades clean. You will see a fine gray lint cling to the cloth, smelling faintly of old static and attic dust. Clean blades bite into the air cleanly, without that ragged, whistling drag that slows down a neglected motor. Turn the fan so the front grille faces the outside world, looking out through the window screen toward the yard. Now, instead of shoving it tight into the window sash, I want you to take a step back. Take a plain wooden ruler, or simply pace it out with your hands. Measure exactly 24 inches, 2 feet, from the window stool to the front face of your fan. Set it down right there on a sturdy table or a stool. Look closely at the space between the fan and the window now. It looks like an empty gap, but to the air, it is a funnel. When the fan begins to spin, pushing air out into the yard, it doesn't just push the air directly in front of it. Because of a principle of nature called entrainment, the way a moving stream of water drags the still water along its banks. That jet of air leaving the fan pulls the surrounding air of the room along with it. By leaving that 2-foot space, the fan acts like a heavy broom, sweeping a column of air out the window that is nearly twice the size of the fan itself. If you jam the machine into the window frame, you choke that effect completely. Now, let us walk to the far side of the house, to the room that feels the coolest. The side wrapped in evening shade where the soil is damp and the air smells of moist earth and cool grass. Open a single window here, but do not throw it wide open. This is where most folks make their first big mistake. They open every single window in the house all the way, thinking more opening means more cool. But when you do that, you drop the speed of the air to nothing. It is like taking the nozzle off a garden hose. The water just spills out lazily at your feet. Instead, open this shade side window just 4 to 6 inches. Go back to your hot room and look at the fan. When you start the motor, you will hear a deep hollow change in the drone of the blades as they grab the air. Walk back to that small opening on the shady side. Stand 3 feet away from it. You will feel a sharp, distinct stream of night air pulling past your face, so crisp it stirs the hairs on your arms. Because the air has a wide 2-foot clearing to leave the house through the fan window, but only a narrow throat to enter on the cool side, it must speed up significantly to satisfy the vacuum. It rushes through the house like a mountain creek, squeezing through a notch in the rocks. Let me warn you about another common error that will ruin a night's cooling. Folks will leave the interior doors to their bedrooms or hallways half shut, or they will leave a large window open right next to the fan window. If you do that, the fan will simply pull air from that nearby window, moving it in a short, useless circle through one corner of a single room, while the rest of the house remains as stuffy as a root cellar. You must think of the path of the air like a string stretched taut from the cool side of the house straight to the fan. Open the doors wide between those rooms. Clear the hallway. Let the current run the full length of the building so every timber can give up its daytime heat. As the night deepens, you will feel the texture of the house begin to shift. The dry, baking smell of daytime plaster and floorboards begins to wash away, replaced by the scent of dew and damp earth coming in from the garden. The heavy oak tables and the iron latches on the doors, which felt warm to the touch at supper time, will start to feel cool and smooth under your palm. That mass is what we are truly cooling, the heavy bones of the house itself. But tomorrow morning brings a completely different task, and if you do not know the second half of this rhythm, all the work we have done tonight will be lost by noon. I want to show you exactly how to read the morning air, how to know the precise moment to shut this whole system down. And the one simple thing you must do with your window shades to lock that midnight coolness inside your walls until the sun goes down again. Now, let us take a quiet moment to look beneath the surface of what is happening here, because there is plain, solid science behind these old ways. Modern engineers call the 2-foot gap trick the Bernoulli principle, or fluid entrainment. But you do not need a university degree to understand it. You only need to look at how a fireplace chimney works. When a fire blazes at the hearth, the hot smoke rushes up the narrow flue. As that smoke leaps upward, it drags the heavy, stagnant air from the room right along with it, creating a powerful draft that pulls fresh air under the cabin door. Your window fan, when backed away from the opening, creates that very same low-pressure draft. Think of the jet of air leaving the blades as a fast-moving leather belt. If you put that belt right inside a narrow slot, it only moves what touches it. But if you back it up, the friction of that moving belt grabs the lazy, still air all around its edges and sweeps it out the window too. You are using the momentum of a small stream to move a whole river. And that brings us to why the house stays cool the next day, which rests on what folks call thermal mass. To understand this, think of a large smooth creek stone left out in the open. If you place that stone in the hot midday sun, it takes hours before it truly warms through, because the rock has a deep capacity to hold what it receives. But once that stone absorbs the midday heat, it will stay warm to the touch long after the sun has gone down behind the hills. A house behaves in the exact same way. Your home is not just a collection of empty rooms, it is tons of solid material, heavy oak timber, thick plaster walls, brick chimneys, and pine flooring. Through a long summer day, those solid materials act like that creek stone, soaking up the heat of the sun. By the time you sit down to supper, the walls themselves are radiating heat back into the rooms like a low-burning stove. When we run the fan outward all night, we are not just changing the air. We are washing those heavy materials in a cold bath for 8 hours, pulling the stored heat out of the very bones of the building until the timbers are thoroughly chilled. But we must speak with absolute honesty about the limits of this method, because it is not a magic charm that works under every sky. There are boundaries where nature will defeat a fan, no matter how wisely you place it. First, this system relies entirely on a temperature differential. It requires the night air to be cooler than the inside of your house. In the high, dry deserts, or here in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, the air clears out and drops 20 or 30 degrees the moment the sun dips below the tree line. In those climates, this method is a marvel. But if you live down in the deep concrete cities, or in the low coastal country where the midnight air stays at 85 degrees and the humidity is so thick it clings to the skin like wet wool, turning the fan around will only draw that hot, sticky soup inside. When the outside air cannot absorb heat, no amount of airflow will magically create a chill. Second, consider the material of your house. This old-fashioned rhythm works beautifully in a heavy frame house with plaster walls, or a stone house with deep windowsills, because those materials have the mass required to hold the night's chill. If you live in a modern trailer, a thin-walled tin shed, or a house with lightweight synthetic paneling and no proper insulation, there is no mass to store the cold. A thin wall will heat up the moment the first sunbeam strikes it at 7 in the morning. For those lightweight structures, closing the windows in the daytime will only trap the heat inside like a tin oven. And the method fails. You must also consider the layout of your building. This natural current works in a house that has an open heart, where rooms connect through wide doorways and air can move horizontally from one side to the other. If you live in a modern apartment with windows on only one single wall, or a house chopped up into small, isolated boxes with tight hallways and no transom windows above the doors, the air cannot flow in a straight line. It will get caught in dead corners, and the vacuum will not pull cleanly from the far side. Understand this: traditional self-sufficiency is not about ignoring modern realities. It is about knowing exactly when a natural solution fits and when it does not. If your climate and your house allow it, this knowledge grants you a quiet independence from the machine. But if the weather turns brutal and the night brings no relief, the old wisdom simply says to endure the heat with patience, just as our grandfathers did when the July sky turned to brass. Tomorrow, I want to take this a step further and look at the brightest enemy of a cool house, the morning sun. I will show you how to read the shadows on your grass so you know the exact minute to shut your doors, and how the old people used the green leaves of summer to build a living shield against the heat before it ever touched the window glass. To know the true history of this way of living, you have to look closely at the older homesteads scattered across the eastern counties of Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the Carolinas. Long before anyone ever dreamed of a copper wire or a coal-fired generator, the builders of the 18th and 19th centuries were carving a living out of the summer humidity using nothing but local stone, oak timber, and an intimate understanding of the wind. They called it passive ventilation, though my grandfather just called it good sense. If you travel through the older German and English settlements here, you will notice that the houses were rarely built facing the road just for looks. They were oriented carefully, usually turned toward the south or southwest, to catch the prevailing summer breezes, while the small, narrow windows were kept on the north side to lock out the bitter winter gales. In the early 1800s, master builders published handbooks, like the Builder's Pocket Companion, which laid out exact rules for the placement of interior doors and high ceilings. They knew that if you aligned the doorways across a central hall, a house could act as a giant wooden bellows, pulling air from the damp woodlots and drawing it through the bedrooms by the mid-20th century. When the electric grid began crawling into the rural valleys, engineers didn't throw this old knowledge away, they tried to measure it. In the 1930s and 1940s, agricultural extension bureaus and university engineering stations published small, paper-covered bulletins for farmers. If you dig through old archives, you can find Texas Engineering Experiment Station Bulletin, number 133, or the early domestic cooling circulars from the University of Illinois. These documents are filled with black and white charts and precise data tables. The researchers didn't use folk tales. They used anemometers and smoke candles to track how air behaves in a domestic dwelling. They were the ones who officially documented that a fan placed 2 feet back from an open window moves significantly more air than one sealed into the sash, calling it the injector effect. They printed plain diagrams showing that a house left open to the cool night air between midnight and dawn could lower the internal temperature of plaster walls by as much as 8 to 10 degrees, providing a reservoir of coolness that lasted deep into the following afternoon. Yet, as the decades rolled on and the air conditioning machine became cheap and common, those paper bulletins were filed away in library basements and forgotten. The common knowing simply slipped through our fingers, replaced by a wire and a monthly bill. We were taught to forget how to work a house, and instead learned only how to flip a switch. But that old knowledge is not dead. It is still written down in the marrow of these old buildings, and it is still sitting right there in your own home, waiting for you to use it, tonight, when the sun finally sinks behind the ridge and the sky turns that deep, cool violet of a summer evening. I want you to step away from the modern instinct. Do not reach for the air conditioner remote. Do not leave your fan jammed up against the window screen, dragging its own air back inside in a useless, expensive loop. Instead, take that fan and turn it around. Face it toward the yard. Pull it back those 2 short feet onto a stool or a table, and watch how it begins to draw the stale, heavy heat of the day out into the grass. Go to the far side of your house. Find that quiet, shaded window where the evening air smells of dew, and crack it open just those few inches. Walk back into the hallway and stand still. Feel that sudden, silent river of air begin to pull past your ankles and cool your skin. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in knowing you can keep your own shelter bearable using nothing but the wind, the night, and a bit of honest understanding. It costs you absolutely nothing but the willingness to stop